Good evening, and welcome to another edition of Sex Addiction in the News, live on Facebook, 5 p.m. And I'm Stacy Sprout. This is my co-host, Sparky Sprout. I don't know if you can see him there. And I am a licensed psychotherapist, certified sex addiction therapist, and author of my own journey of recovery called Naked in Public, a memoir of recovery from sex addiction and other temporary insanities. Thank you for joining me this evening, and thank you for the people who sent me stories because they significantly shaped our broadcast this week. So I really appreciate your feedback. And if you can hang in there till the end of the broadcast, I am going to be asking a question about who you would like to see me interview for my next interview, because I am curious about who you are curious about, who you'd like to learn more out there in the field of sex addiction. Definitely looking for people who are in their own personal sexual recovery, maybe have something to share that you would be interested in. So think about that. We'll see if we get any ideas. And I created this broadcast because I am passionate about destigmatizing the conversation about sex addiction so that those afflicted, and that includes porn addiction, can get help now. This includes individuals, couples, families, and communities. And it's intended to be educational, created for anyone who's interested in what the world is saying about sex addiction. I'll be checking the live feed at the end of the show if there's any comments or questions. And let's get right in and see what's up. In our headline news tonight, this story, we feature Junot Diaz, author of a personal history article in the April 16th issue of The New Yorker titled "The Silence, the Legacy of Childhood Trauma." And the subtitle is, "I never got any help, any kind of therapy. I never told anyone." Now, I am breaking a rule I set for my broadcast by featuring this story because I originally planned to only highlight stories that talk about sex and love addiction directly because I wanted to raise awareness. But this story was sent to me via email by 5 different people. And after the 5th link to the same story came in, I thought, okay, it's striking a nerve with people, and people who know about sex and love addiction symptoms are seeing things in this story that they can relate to. So I decided, even if he doesn't call himself by that label, and I'm not trying to diagnose him or anything like that, I just felt that this story would be of interest to viewers. So here it is. It's told by a courageous man who vulnerably shares his history of being raped and going on to have life-threatening sexual and relationship problems as a result. And you'll hear in the excerpt that includes both acting in or avoiding sex and acting out, or having the painfully disconnected sex and infidelity patterns that sex addicts and those who love them know so well. So here are a few excerpts from the Dominican American writer and Pulitzer Prize winner Junot Diaz's story. And on the New Yorker page, if you haven't already read the story, there is a link there and it has an audio, so you can also hear that. And I'll include the link on my YouTube site, as I will for all of these stories. So the author is writing to a fan and to all of us as he shares. So here's an excerpt. "Last week I returned to Amherst. It's been years since I was there. The time we met. I was hoping that you'd show up again. I even looked for you, but you didn't appear. I remember you proudly repped New York City during the few minutes we spoke, so I suspect you'd moved back, or maybe you were busy, or you didn't know I was in town. I have a distant memory of you in the signing line, saying nothing to anyone, intense. I assumed you were going to ask me to read a manuscript or help you find an agent, but instead, you asked me about the sexual abuse alluded to in my books. You asked, quietly, if it had happened to me. You caught me completely by surprise. I wish I had told you the truth then, but I was too scared in those days to say anything. Too scared too committed to my mask. I responded with some evasive bullshit, and that was it. I signed your books. You thought I was going to say something, and when I didn't, you looked disappointed. But more than that, you looked abandoned. I could have said anything, but instead I turned to the next person in line and smiled. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched you pick up your backpack, slowly put away your books, and leave. When the signing was over, I couldn't wait to get the F away from Amherst, from you and your question, fast enough. I ran the way I've always run, like death itself was chasing me. For a couple of days afterward, I fretted. I worried that I'd given myself away. But then the old oblivion reflex took over. I pushed it all down, buried it all, like always. But I never really did forget. Not our exchange or your disappointment. How you walked out of that auditorium with your shoulders hunched. I know this is years too late, but I'm sorry I didn't answer you. I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth. I'm sorry for you, and I'm sorry for me. We both could have used that truth, I'm thinking. It could have saved me, and maybe you, from so much. But I was afraid. I'm still afraid. And my fear, like continents and the ocean between. But I'm going to speak anyway, because, as Audre Lorde has taught us, my silence will not protect me. Yes, it happened to me. I was raped when I was 8 years old by a grown-up that I truly trusted. Junot Diaz goes on to write, after he raped me, he told me that I had to return the next day or I would be, quote, in trouble. And because I was terrified and confused, I went back the next day and was raped again. And I never told anyone what happened, but today I'm telling you, and anyone else who cares to listen. That violation, not enough pages in the world to describe what it did to me. Of course, I never got any kind of help, any kind of therapy. Like I said, I never told anyone. In a family as big as mine, 5 kids, it was easy to get lost, even when you were going under. I remember my mother telling me after one of my depressions that I should pray. I didn't even bother to laugh. Diaz goes on to describe living through symptoms of untreated PTSD, nightmares, the inability to focus or function, withdrawal, suicidal ideation, and an attempt to kill himself. Then, after getting accepted to college, he remade himself, describing putting on a mask of success and accomplishment. He goes on to write, but as any Freudian will tell you, trauma is stronger than any mask. It can't be buried, and it can't be killed. It's the revenant that won't stop, the ghost that's always coming for you. The nightmares, the intrusions, the hiding, the doubts, the confusion, the self-blame, the suicidal ideation. They didn't just go away because I buried my neighborhood, my family, my face. The nightmares, the intrusions, the hiding, the doubts, the confusion, the self-blame, the suicidal ideation, they all followed. All through college, all through graduate school, all through my professional life, all through my intimate life. Leaked into my writing too, but you'd be amazed how easy it is to rewrite the truth away. Didn't matter how far I ran or what I achieved or who I was with, they followed. Diaz shares subsequent patterns of sexual and intimacy avoidance, alcohol abuse, promiscuity, hurting others, more drinking and drug use, trying to forget his abuse. He fell in love with a woman, got engaged, and then cheated on her many, many times with a secret double life until one day she caught him. And he writes, I'm sure she'd been having doubts for a while, especially after one woman showed up at a reading of mine and burst into tears when I said hi. She decided, there he is. So again, he writes, I'm sure she'd been having doubts for a while, especially after one woman I showed up at a reading of mine and burst into tears when I said hi. She decided to go snooping through my emails, and since I wasn't big on passwords or putting old emails in the trash, it took her less than 5 minutes to find what she was looking for. A heartbreak can take out a world. I know hers did. Took out her world and mine. And I think, yep, I just feel sad. I cheated on other people and I was cheated on. So I just recognize the heartbreak of this story. I'm so grateful for recovery so I don't have to live that story today. But it makes me sad when I hear it. He writes, another woman might have shot me dead on principle, but she simply printed out all the emails between me and all my other girls, all my bullshit seduction attempts, all the photos, had the evidence of my betrayals bound, and when I came home from one of my trips, handed them to me. When I realized what she'd given me, I blacked out, which is what tends to happen when the world ends. A few months later, Diaz won the Pulitzer Prize, but his descent into depression and suicidality deepened. After 2 more years and another suicide attempt, he got into therapy and began to turn things around. Though he doesn't call himself a sex or love addict, the story seems very familiar to many who do. The research shows that there's a very high percentage of people who affirm having sex or love addictions who have been sexually abused. Certainly even higher have been emotionally abused. So, yeah, this story has been picked up by more than just the New Yorker. It was featured in the Chicago Tribune. The title there was, in essay revealing he was raped at 8, novelist Junot Diaz shines light on male sexual assault. So we've heard many stories of women being sexually harassed, bullied, raped, assaulted, molested as children in the Me Too movement. And we've known that men are subject to the same kind of victimization. So here is a story coming out about that. And I think we're going to hear more stories from men. And I think we're also going to be hearing stories about men who are victimized by women, because that happens far more often than we ever hear, including boys who are molested by women and girls. So even though it's painful to talk about, this is someone who got into therapy and is working really hard to turn his life around, and that includes not keeping the secret. In Partners and Families and Sex Addiction, we feature an article from a publication called Femina. Now, this is the first and most read women's English magazine in India, a publication described as capturing the essence of the Indian woman for 58 years. And here are some excerpts from the article, which is titled, Is Your Partner a Sex Addict? It's written by Hamchaya Day, and I apologize if I've mispronounced that beautiful name. Published on April 4th, 2018. Once again, we are learning and being taught from people of color, and I love the diversity I'm seeing in the news stories about sex addiction recovery. It's really good to see. The story reads, we all know about an alcohol or drug addiction and how that can wreak havoc on a person's relationships. But there is another kind of addiction that's still talked about in hushed tones. It's called sex addiction. Experts say that sex addiction cases are rising in India, but there's hardly any study that throws up substantive statistics. If any of the partners in a relationship is diagnosed with sex addiction, it can put considerable strain on their love life. Please remember that having a high sex drive or fetishes or getting hooked to cybersex and internet doesn't make one a sex addict automatically. You need to look for other expert-backed symptoms and take several factors into consideration. Often, sex addicts live in denial. Here are some signs you should watch for to see if your partner may be addicted to sex. 1. Secrecy. 2. They're preoccupied or obsessed, always thinking about sex. 3. They stare at or objectify others, including pornographic or sexually explicit images on screen. 4. They avoid sex and prefer porn instead. 5. They have unbridled fantasies. 6. Frequent masturbation. 7. Affairs or outside sexual pursuits from your relationship. 8. Irritability and depression. 9. They have complaints against them for their sexual behavior, or they've had actual legal problems, perhaps booked for sex offenses like exhibitionism, voyeurism, or other legal problems. That's 9. 10, they seem disconnected from personal relationships. 11, they feel self-loathing and shame. And 12, you as the partner are suffering. Partners of untreated sex addicts often experience the following symptoms. 1. Great emotional pain and turmoil. Uncontrollable anger. Trust issues. Sexually transmitted disease or infection. And separation, which is often a consequence if one partner is not willing to get help. The article goes on to share what someone can do if they are having these experiences and suspecting that their partner is a sex addict. And it says, first, identify the problem and talk about it. That's number 2. And part of the identification of the problem might be to look at resources. Like one of the books I've had on my show is The Storm of Sex Addiction, which is a good resource when you're just learning about what's going on, by Connie Lofgren. The article recommends that you seek professional help, particularly someone with some kind of a specialty in sex and love addiction to help you. And that you seek support from safe people around you, and I thought this was an important comment, to ignore negative comments from others. And I think what the article was talking about is that particularly if a partner suspects that their partner has a sex addiction, but for whatever reason is not ready to leave the relationship, and they tell people can be very condemning of their desire to try to figure out what to do, maybe not make any major changes. There may be other factors, but I feel really sad because I've seen this happen enough times in life, and I'm glad it's written about in this article, that partners are dealing with the shock and trauma of discovery of a sex addiction, and then they talk with people around them about what they should do. And if they're not immediately ready to leave the relationship, then they get criticized by other people for staying. And I just think that's so sad. I mean, it may be right for them to stay or leave, and they need time to figure that out a lot of times. Sometimes they don't, but sometimes they do. And it just always, those stories feel like insult to injury. I think partners who are traumatized really need a lot of support, positive support for figuring out what to do. So that was an amazing story, and I'm grateful for it. In Sex Addiction and the Law, did you hear that Backpage.com was seized by the FBI? Well, it was. And if you go to Backpage.com website since April 5th, 2018, you can read this. It says, Backpage.com and affiliated websites have been seized as part of an enforcement action by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, and the International Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division with analytical assistance from the Joint Regional Intelligence Center. It goes on to offer another long list of agencies participating and supporting the enforcement action, including the U.S. District Attorney's Office for Arizona and several more. According to many stories, which you may have read, but one of them on the BBC News Online said an investigation of Backpage had suggested that as many as 1 in 20 of the relevant posts on backpage.co.uk could have involved slavery victims as young as 14 years old. So that is a significant change in the culture, particularly if those sites stay down. And my comment on this story is, as I've been putting the story out there, I've already heard some protests of this action, and I did read that there were some women who were marching because they believe that eliminating Backpage and Craigslist Personals and similar websites means that prostituted women or women who work as prostitutes will be denied a safer alternative to trying to solicit sex than on the streets, and that will put them at risk. However, this article doesn't make sense to me because selling sex is illegal. So, except in a few small counties in the United States, I believe selling and buying sex is harmful to everyone involved, and it should not be protected. There are already efforts underway to support people, particularly women trapped in the sex industry, and help them to find help to get out. We have a lot further to go in that area, but exploitation of self or selling sex to others is not a right. I believe the sex industry is exploitive and should be shut down completely. So, I've just, there's the issue of accessibility. As a sex addiction therapist, I've heard so many heartbreaking stories over the last decade of Backpage.com and similar sites facilitating people acting out in ways that cross their own values and things they've not done before. And this has enabled deception and infidelities, which led to broken relationships and divorced families. So, while individuals are responsible for their own behavior, hopefully this change will make such behavior less accessible and not quite so easy. But all of that aside, shutting down Backpage.com is really about child protection and how to stop sexual abuse and trafficking of children. And I think hopefully we can all stand up for that. However, if you are watching this and you are in the sex industry and you want a way out, or you know someone who does, there's been a new resource list that's been created by the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, or NACOSE, that is listed state by state in the United States, some numbers or agencies that you can call and get help from. So if you need this, you can check out this list. It's posted online at sextradesurvivorresources.com. That's sextradesurvivorresources.com. Our next story involves, in our LGBTQ and sex addiction feature, I want to announce the International Transgender Certification Association. Created by sex therapy pioneer and a certified sex addiction therapist, Dr. Carol Clark, this program is called the ITCS for short, and their mission is to provide credentialing, standards of practice, professional identity, and self-regulation for service providers of the transgender community. And I am so excited about this certification because for a long time, I couldn't find any specific people to refer to who had specific training, or if I wanted to get training myself and how to support people who are working on their identities and the process of being transgender and what that means and their unique needs. So this organization recognizes that the transgender community has long been underserved by the community at large, of healthcare providers in particular. There has been limited research and training of providers in the field of transgender healthcare. ITCA advances the field of transgender healthcare and those diverse professionals and community supporters committed to enhancing the lives of transgender, transsexual, and gender non-conforming people in all cultural settings. The purpose of this organization is to provide a cohesive organization that credentials healthcare professionals and community providers by promoting ethical guidelines, offering training and education, and developing networking resources. So this story is not specifically about sex addiction, but as I said, I'm very proud that the founder of this program is an expert in both sex and sex addiction therapy, which are two fields and they're not the same. So she's very well trained. I celebrate that we are gaining clinical resources to better enable therapists to treat the trans community and promote trans health, mental health, and sexual health. Our sex addiction book of the week this week is a brand new release, a sex and love addiction recovery memoir called Unwifeable. I don't know if you can see it too well, but here's the book here, and it's published by Simon & Schuster, and it was just released on April 3rd, and the author is Mandy Stattmiller. Mandy Stattmiller worked as a dating columnist for the New York Post, and she's been called the real-life Carrie Bradshaw, referencing the lead character of the popular TV show Sex and the City. So I've started reading this book. I have not finished it yet, but it's a very engaging read. And what I'm thinking is that maybe Sex in the City should have been called Sex and Love Addiction in the City, because Mandy admits that she was addicted to sex and she found help. And so here are some of Mandy's words. She has written an article about her story in the Daily Beast and another publication, How to Become Unwifeable and Be Cool with That, and a similar article from the New York Post. So I'll talk a little bit more about my take on the book, but here are some of her words. If you look deep inside every woman, you will find a black box that records the wreckage of her past relationships. Internal recordings that can withstand the G-force impact of total obliteration that comes with a coupling's end. Quote, "We've got bonding failure. Tell the world I'm sorry. We're going down." She writes, "I wasn't just a self-destructive exhibitionist whose crippling neuroses manifested in navel-gazing narcissism and random acts of implosion. Instead, I told myself I was a feminist. My warp-speed career in personal memoir I claimed to be the ultimate act, making myself as terrifying to men as possible." She writes, "I was a living don't, and I was okay with that." Instigating sexual chaos provided me with the perfect excuse for my inability to save myself or learn from past mistakes. I had plausible deniability that way, massive backlog, an unrelenting influx of more pressing cases, all to avoid confronting the most devastating moments of original impact or having to assume personal responsibility for my failures along the way to correct course. She writes, "That's the problem with any emotional investigation. You need an unwavering focus in the face of overwhelming shame and regret and distraction. No matter what unsettling evidence emerges as all the ugly secrets start inevitably spilling out, you must resolve to never give up. It's a tricky endeavor, even for the bravest among us." And she is brave. I can hear her I can hear her self-reflection in her writing and her amends in the tone. Mandy said of when she bottomed out, "It triggered the worst depression I've ever experienced. Not long after that, she swore off drugs and alcohol once and for all." And she says, "But anyone who's ever experienced it in their own life knows addiction is akin to one of those whack-a-mole games. Whack one thing down, another pops up. When substances were off the table as an option, I became even more addicted to sex. To absolutely no one's surprise, it all came crashing down when I ran out of money and ran out of men. Moving back home to live with my parents at the age of 36 with less than $300 in the bank, I knew it was time for me to finally look at myself and every bad thing I'd ever done. Self-care became a full-time job, and I went to 12-step meetings like my life depended on it, because With an addiction, it often does. I was determined to find out why I kept degrading myself and hurting so many people. After several years, I grew to accept and forgive and even integrate what darkness lurked beneath the surface so that it didn't consume me. She learned that a lot of her self-hatred and subsequent addiction came from trying to suppress herself for other people. She says, and I don't think I could have ever found out my good without coming to terms with everything I've done that was so very, very bad. I haven't finished the book yet, but like I said, I am enjoying it. It's poignant. So, like many sex and love addicts, Mandy was raped at age 15. For her, it was by a family member, and then she was shamed and blamed for it. So she didn't have it easy, but her strength of spirit, humor, and faith are inspiring. And this book might be a little blunt or sexually graphic for some people, especially if people are in recovery from sex and love addiction themselves and they're trying to decrease their sexual stimulation as opposed to add some more. But so far, I haven't found it gratuitous. She really does keep the focus on her addictive process. And so other people, I think, will find the detail in her experiences they can closely relate to. And it may help them see themselves in a new way and offer a doorway to the path out. Ultimately, I celebrate yet another woman's courage to come forth and tell her story of sex and love addiction recovery. And she has a major publisher and she's getting some major press, so that's fun to see. Mandy's story reminds any woman who might want to seek marriage that though you may feel or even at one time relish the idea of being unwifeable, you can be known and be loved for who you are, and you can emerge from sexual chaos into a successfully faithful relationship. That is my own experience and such a gift of the recovery journey, and I feel so profoundly grateful for it. So I will attach a link to this story on the YouTube channel for Sex Addiction in the News, and there will be an audio excerpt there that you can listen to also. So congratulations to Mandy for helping to get the word out about sex, drugs, and alcohol addiction, and that recovery is available. And speaking of women talking about sex and love addiction, I'm excited to announce a first-time ever event coming up next month at the International Institute of Trauma and Recovery, or Trauma and IITAP. Trauma and Addiction, IITAP. Trauma and Addiction Professionals Annual Symposium for Certified Sex Addiction Therapists. So IITAP, the organization putting it on, is going to host this event, and it is Friday, May 4th. It's in Phoenix at the Regency Hyatt. The event is free and open to the public, and it's 6:30 to 8:30 p.m., so anyone can go. I really hope that people can make it. There are the feature is Erica Garza, who I think was on my very first show, on her Today Show appearance for her sex addiction memoir, Getting Off. She's going to talk about her book. And then Charlene de Guzman is going to talk about her film that she wrote and starred in about her own love addiction. And her film is called Unlovable, which I recently featured on my show. And then they're going to show Charlene's movie, which is really fun because it's not widely released. It's not widely released yet, so it's a rare opportunity to get to see it. And then afterward, there's going to be a panel. And so Marnie Faree, who is a pioneer in female sex and love addiction identification, assessment, treatment, she's written several books, definitely just a huge leader in the field in this area. And I get to sit on the panel too. And so we're going to do some Q&A. I'm really looking forward to it. And the last thing I'll say that night, which is May 4th, for this show, Sex Addiction in the News, is that Erica and Charlene have agreed to be on my show, along with Amy Smith, who is the founder of Worth Recovery. And Worth Recovery has a podcast for women, sex and love addicts, as well as she has put on multiple public events educating the public about female sex and love addiction, really the first of their kind anywhere in the world that I know about. And these three women are going to be on my show, and I'm super excited to get to talk with them and share them with you. So please tune in. It's just a few weeks away, May 4th, and I'm really looking forward to that. So that is all our news. We are seeking stories always, although I do have 2 in the queue for next week, so there's some good stuff coming up. But if you see stories in the public that you think would be a good fit for this show, feel free to send them on Facebook Messenger or through Naked in Public News at gmail.com. Together we can get the word out about what's being said about sex addiction. And before we stop, I'm just going to take a look and see who's here. Oh, I see. Awesome. Friends and family are here and some people I don't know. So thank you so much for being here. I am delighted that you can be here. And now I have a question. If anyone is interested, you can type it in. Is there anyone that you would like to see me interview for the show? Because I am curious. There's so many great people out there. People that you know of in the public eye. I don't know if I can get them to do it, but I can certainly try. So anybody have any ideas of who you think I should ask to be on the show? Oh, thank you for that lovely comment. Well, I won't stay too long in radio silence, but if you can think of anyone, feel free to send me an email. Just say, hey, I'd like to hear more from this person, or I'd like you to interview this person. And it would be someone who's in the public already. Maybe they published a book, or they're already comfortable being out about their sex and love addiction, and who we can talk to, I could talk to, and just find out how they did it, basically, how their recovery is working. So, all right. Well, that's our show tonight. So thank you so much for joining me and your interest in the topic. If you're on Facebook, or if you are seeing this later on YouTube, thank you also. If you want to subscribe to the show, oh, I just got a comment. I would like to see you interview Marnie Faree. Wow, that would be so wonderful. Okay, Jenny, I am going to track her down, and I'm going to tell her that Patrick Carnes. Oh, there's someone. Okay, this is great. I'm getting my assignments. Thank you. Marnie Faree and Patrick Carnes would be 2 amazing people to interview, and I can tell them that the viewers have requested them, and we'll see if we can. We'll just see what they say. So I'll get back to you on that, and Thanks again for being here. Oh, if you're watching on YouTube and you want to get announcements of the next show, feel free to, hey there, feel free to click the subscribe button and the little bell, and then you'll get notifications when new shows are published. So thanks for being here. And in signing off, I will say that I hope I will leave you with this. Oh, see you next week, Friday nights at 5. May you feel loved. May you feel cherished, and may you love and cherish others. I'm Stacy Sprout, signing off. Mahalo, and have a wonderful weekend. Good night.